Hey everyone, my name is Kennedy Thomas, and today I'm going to be presenting green light therapy for migraine relief. I just want to say, just for start off, I'm so sorry if you hear my cat in the background. I tried everything. He will not be quiet. He's a kitten, he's a baby, so I'm not judging. But, anyways, let's get into our presentation. I am interested in this topic of green light therapy and migraines because I actually suffer from migraines myself. From my experiences, from the frustration of just trying to find the solution, trying to find the answers to my questions or to everyone's questions in terms of what is the cause of migraines, is genetic, how can we cure it, what's going on, you know, it's frustrating. And the fact that there is no cure, you're kind of actually, you are on two options, either medication or you're taking the more holistic, more natural approach. And for me personally, I'm not a big fan of I love being natural and holistic, but I get lost when I see blogs talking about, oh, you have to eat this twice a day in order to feel like this. So I don't know. I get skeptical with that kind of stuff. And I also don't want to take medications because to some degree it's not good for your body. So it's just this frustration. And for scientists now, we are or they are trying to find ways to have people bear with this problem, bear with this illness. Once again, I apologize for the background. Just to give you a brief outline on what to expect for this presentation, I'm going to give you some background information on migraines, as well as background information on green light in general. I'm going to give you the connection, or we're going to talk about the connection. I'm also going to discuss the experiment, as well as the hypothesis, the methods and data associated with the experiment, as well as the take-home message. Okay, so just to give you some background information on migraines, migraines are the most prevalent illness in the world, most common illness in the world. About 39 billion people worldwide suffer from this issue. And I think like 38 million people alone in the US. So this is not like a rare condition or anything like that. This is a common problem, and yet there is still no cure for it. However, I must say that we are starting to find solutions or hypotheses for what could possibly be going wrong or how, what are ways to cope with it. So I can give science kudos to that. But to continue, people who suffer from migraines also suffer from severe symptoms from that. And that includes dizziness, nausea, difficulty speaking, disorientedness, um, extreme pain in the neck, stiff back, overall pain in the face. It's terrible, and sometimes people even faint, vomit from it, and everything like that. But the most biggest symptom for migraines that completely differs it from any other typical headache is light. And for migraines and people who suffer from migraines, are very sensitive to light, meaning that there is phototopia, which you will see that term pop up a bunch of times in this experiment, in this whole presentation. So when you see phototopia or hear phototopia, think of light sensitivity. So people who have migraines, you might find them, if they're having an attack, they want to sit in a dark room, a dark, quiet room, all because of just the brain is so sensitive to just the different frequencies and the sounds and the lights. Everything is hyperactive practically. And as I said earlier, there is no cure, but we are starting to find ways and we are digging deep. We're getting curious as to just finding our way into what the problem is really. And what I enjoy is that science has found a way to correlate, not medicine, not a food that's natural, but light, the most purest energy form, light. And as much as light can hurt us for migraines and everything like that, it's crazy to even put together that green light in general even helps. And from this presentation, I hope that you learned that, oh, well, I guess I should go ahead and go on to the next slide for green light. I hope that you get from this presentation that as I talk about green light generating small signals to the brain and meaning that our brain isn't reacting to the brain as much, I hope you take away that as though green light doesn't make our brain and our neurons fire off as much as crazy, I hope you put together that green light can also decrease the frequency of headaches. So if you put together the high intensity of migraines plus green light in this proposition that it can decrease frequencies, people are just curious of this correlation. When I'm talking about green light, I'm not talking about your typical green light bulb or your green stoplight or your green LED light or strip lights. I'm talking about a specific light that comes from a certain source, a pure source. And just as any other medication or type of administration to someone or something in terms of research, it's not like oh, go sit in the room for X amount of minutes and just see how you feel. I mean, it's cool for doing a baseline, which we'll talk about in a second, but it has to be systematic. So you have to go through trials and error in order to really figure out what's going on and what the correlation is. Okay, so let's talk about the connection. I really wanted to nail down this main point, this one connection, the difference between rods and cones. The difference between rods and cones is that rods, they do not work well in light. They do not work well in low light, I should say. And they're the reason why we don't see color at night, if you think about it. So if you get the point, rods, no color, they're not really useful except for helping us see at night. However, cones, on the other hand, is the opposite. Cones are most active when there is light, and they help us see color. So that's really the connection that I really want you to make. And I should have said this a second earlier, but this is why we think rods and cones can contribute to phototopia, well, specifically cones, because we know that people who have migraines and they end up being in front of a color, we know that has to do with cones. As we just said, cones associate with color. That means cones have to be the reason or have to be that source of pathway of what's going on or what's not connecting right. That makes sense. Okay, so let's get into the experiment. So this experiment was based in Boston, Massachusetts, and they were curious on this topic. I read a few of their studies, and they were very curious. They looked at previous articles on other professors and other studies on these hypotheses and these assumptions on green light helping, blue light helping, red light being the worst, and yellow light being kind of okay. So it's just all of these thoughts in the air, and this group of experimenters wanted to test that. So in part of the experiments, it was broken down into three different things. First was the electroretinography test, which the function of that test is to detect the function of the retina, the function of your eye. Next is the multi-unit recording test in the rat thalamus. This is the only test that was done on rats in this particular experiment that I used for my presentation, compared to the other two. The top bullet point in the lower bullet point is that they were done on humans. So the middle one was done on rats, of course. And the purpose of that was to find the dura-sensitive neurons. So we're trying to figure out which neurons are going to react the most, kind of thing. Next and finally was the visual evoked potential recording test, which is basically a highly advanced vision test that measures how well your entire vision system is overall working. And this can be seen in the medical field, very useful in the medical field to doctors. They use this high advanced test to detect and diagnose various eye disorders. Okay, let's get into the hypothesis. So if patients have migraines associated with colors, then phototopia, meaning light sensitivity, could originate in the cone-driven retinal pathways. So we already kind of thought of this, but we just had to write down something for our hypothesis just to get us going, to get our thoughts going. Okay, let's get into the methods before the testing. So before the initial experiment, the experimenters had to create a baseline to base all of their collected data off of. And in this baseline study, 69 participants were involved. All of the participants were recruited from various healthcare clinics, and they were all aged from between the age of 15 to 85 years old. And what I wanted to slide in is what makes this experiment especially unique is that during this experiment, 41 of the 69 participants were actually undergoing a migraine attack while completing the series of assessments that the scientists wanted. So they were able to catch some extremely great raw data of what happens, what is going on with the eye and the brain in terms of colors and migraine. So they got some really good information on this. So these assessments I was just talking about, they included finding the effects that different colors of light had on the intensity of the headache, the throbbing pain, the muscle stiffness or muscle tenderness, as I was talking about earlier with the neck pain and the face being sensitive and everything like that, and as well as the areas affected by the pain. So this would include like the head, the neck, side of the head, and everything like that. So prior to testing, the patients were allowed to sit in a dimly lit room for about 20 minutes. After 3 minutes, the patients were verbally asked to rate their headache on a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 being the worst. They were asked to outline their location, as I said, behind the eyes, on the forehead, on the side of the forehead, behind the head. And they were also instructed to indicate whether they were experiencing any throbbing pain or any tenderness or muscle tenderness in their neck, um, in order to accurately collect their baseline testing in order to go forward to the real test. So let's get started to the real test. Okay, so let's talk about the methods for the first part, the first bullet point of this experiment, the electroretinography test. So in this test, 46 of the 69 participants were involved. All of the electroretinography recordings, in order to collect their data, they were done using one disposable corneal recording electrode, which was comfortable and easy to use for both the experimenters and the participants. In order to do the recordings, they also had to attach a gold electrode to their forehead as well as a ground silver clip to their ear. So now we're recording um, um, data from the eyes and to the brain. So within this portion of the test or portion of this experiment, it was broken down or sub-broken down into three different parts. One was the light adapted single flash cone electroretinography, which was conducted to give participants about 10 minutes to adapt to the background light, involving different intervals of flashes of white flashes of light, I should say. So just getting the participants comfortable to the different um, lights of flashes. Next was the light adapted 30 hertz flicker cone electroretinography, which consisted of 150 single flashes of light delivered over a period of 5 seconds. Next, and finally, was the dark adapted rod electroretinography test. And the purpose of this test was to basically reset the cones to minimize cone detection. So in order to do this, we had to make sure, or not we as if I'm doing it, but the experimenters had to make sure the participants sat in a room for exactly 20 minutes before they did any other further testing, just to reset everything. So let's talk about the results and data. So this graph that I inserted depicts the calculated average of the light adapted single flash electroretinography, the standard light adapted 30 hertz flickering electroretinography, and the dark adapted rod electroretinography. Graph A right here, shows the light adapted single flash electroretinography waveforms averaged across patients in response to the initial 385 flashes the participants were giving. So that single flash, that was the 387 flashes. And that shows that over time, we see an increase in amplitude with the various of colors. And from this, we can conclude, and we'll also conclude from B once I get to it, that the color green ultimately has the lowest amplitude. For graph B, to describe it, For the light adapted 30 hertz flickering electroretinography, this displays the same thing, the waveforms averaged across patients in response to each color, but it shows that green light was significantly smaller than that generated of the blue, red, and white light. And from this graph, we can, in which we will see over and over again in this experiment, that we will see consistency that green light, whether it's registered through the eye or registered through the brain or both, the frequency is lower. Patients are responding to green light as if it's helping them, as if it's not affecting them. So overall, we are seeing this consistency that green light is indeed less reactive than the other colors involved in this experiment. I'm sorry I gave you guys all the spoilers, basically. But next, let's talk about the methods for the multi-unit recording test in the rat thalamus. So this was a test that includes the rat, of course. And this involves 3 incisions that the experimenters made on the rat's brain, specifically on the right back part of its brain, of his brain. And they inserted 3 tetrodes into its brain, into the incisions. And the point of this was to find and trigger these neurons that they hope to find with electrical pulses. Once they found these dura-sensitive neurons, these light-sensitive neurons, they exposed it to 140 simulation cycles of white, 249 simulation cycles of blue, 188 simulation cycles of green, and 192 simulation cycles of red. And later on, we will find out in the resulting data if the experimenters found a great enough amount of neurons. We'll find that out later. Actually, we'll find out next. So they ended up finding, recording, and isolating 97 thalamic neurons. And right here in this picture, you can see where they inserted the incisions in the posterior portion of the brain, the right posterior thalamus to be exact. And they ended up finding 97 thalamic neurons. Of these 97 thalamic neurons, 24 of these were dura sensitive, 73 were dura insensitive, 37 were light sensitive, and 60 was light insensitive. And from this, we were able to detect that even in a rat's brain, strictly focusing on the brain and electrical pulses directly to the brain, we find that once green light was simulated, that it was the same, or I don't want to say the same exact thing, but it was crazy to see that the rat thalamus had the same outcome as if the human thalamus has. And as I mentioned before, the thalamus for us, our neurons are very sensitive. So the fact that we were able to find the same correlation with the rat thalamus in support of green light in comparison of the other colors being intense and causing spasms or whatever the rats were experiencing, we found that correlation. So that was the purpose of this test, and to also prove that thalamic neurons were very sensitive as well. Okay, so let's get into further results and data over this. From this, we can see that in the LP and the PO, which I should have mentioned, but the LP is basically for the lateral posterior of the brain, and the PO is for the posterior of the brain, and the VPN is for the ventral medial part of the brain, and this is the nucleus that I'm talking about. So the nucleus within a brain. And from this, we can see that there's just less light activity with green light overall. And we can even see that even for the VPN, certain portion of the brain had no effects at all, which was pretty interesting as I was trying to make the correlation of of the PO being the most sensitive. Okay, so let me go to the next one. Okay, So let's talk about the methods for the visual evoked potential recording test. So in this portion, in the final portion of this experiment, involved 49 of the 69 participants. And in this portion of the study, the participants were positioned in front of a color dome, which I added a little picture to give you a good idea of what a color dome. I thought a dome would be like an actual head thing or something, but it's kind of like if you go to the eye doctors and you sit at that weird thing and you look into this tunnel, it's kind of like that. That's their version of the color dome. But the light was turned on at the lowest intensity, and then it was increased incrementally for about 30 seconds, and then this resulted in 1,792 flashes. The first light was white, the second light was blue, the third was green, the fourth was yellow, and the fifth was red. And while looking at the light, they were once again asked to describe any change of their headache intensity, as well as any pains associated with wherever they were feeling the pain associated with the color. So we will find the results and data on the next page. Okay, so from this, this picture depicts the magnitude of the activity recorded from the cortex. And from this, we can see a consistency, once again, between our eyes and our brain, that light has lower reception of pain signals when registered with the eye. And from this, we can conclude that with light having the lowest amplitude here, we can conclude that even at the highest intensity, results nearly show that 80% of the patients demonstrated a worsening headache. And this was true for all of the colors except green. We can see this demonstrated even with a superimposed image with because this is what this is. This is just showing all of these smushed together. And even this box plot here just shows that just that this magnitude of what green light has. And not only that, but we found that all of these colors were true except for green. And for the exposure to green, we found that about negative, or not negative, about not negative, I'm thinking of the next slide, but there was a positive 20% decrease in pain frequency. So that's a good thing. And it sounds weird, but I'm gonna show you a slide afterwards right here. So this is what I was talking about. I didn't mean to say negative, but we see that green light has the opposite effect. So we see that as light intensity increases and change we see as light intensity increases, we see the change in the headache increases. So for example, for white light, we see that as light intensifies, that the change of the headache is getting worse and worse and worse. Ooh, sorry about that. That the pain is getting worse and worse and worse. We see blue, it's up and down, up and down. Yellow and red's doing its own thing. But for green, green went the opposite way. So not only did it not even show signs of pain at well, it did a little outlier, but it showed that it had the magnitude to decrease its pain overall. And here it just shows results and data of the pains associated with the different colors. We see that for green, we see less areas affected with the light intensity. And in conclusion here, I just want to wrap up that green light is least likely to exacerbate pain, migraine, or any sorry, I got my brain flustered. Green light doesn't exacerbate any type of pain when someone suffers from a migraine. We could propose, and from my hypothesis that was supported, we could propose that migraine phototopia can originate in cone-driven retinal pathways, and it is relayed through light-sensitive thalamic neurons in the cortex. And overall, that green light therapy works. So thanks again for watching my presentation. I hope I didn't take too much of your time. But yeah, thank you.